Hey everybody, got a question. This or this or a balloon or nothing at all? How do you airlock? Welcome back everybody. Thanks for finding my channel. I appreciate you being here, taking the time to listen. I wanted to do a quick video about airlocks because I've seen a lot of stuff on YouTube, you read about things, and I kind of want to talk about, should you use one, shouldn't you use one? What about what these people are doing, on YouTube where they're running out to the store and buying a bottle of juice and throwing in some yeast and sticking a balloon on the top of the juice bottle with a pinhole in it. Let's back up for a second. In order to understand what to use or why to use, we need to understand what's happening. So if you're new to brewing and you don't know the full chemistry and biology behind it, in the most basic terms I can think of, you're feeding an organism. So yeast is a single cell organism and it feeds on sugar. So when you're putting yeast into sugar, that's feeding it. That's if you've ever made sourdough starter for sourdough and you ever hear the term, I need to feed my sourdough, or I need to feed my starter, that's what you're doing. You're adding some kind of sugar so that the yeast have something to eat. So, can you take a bottle of juice from the store, throw in some yeast, put a balloon on it, put a little pinhole, and will that work? And why would you want to do all that? Here's what I'm going to say about that. There's a lot of videos out there that you can watch where people are doing just that. So the first answer is yes. Yeah, you can, right? The yeast doesn't care, right? The yeast doesn't care what you put on top, with the exception of the fact that, if you're using a balloon, it might not be, sterile, and it might have, wild yeast or something on it, and it could make it difficult for the yeast that you're using to take hold and grow a colony, or you might introduce something that you really don't want in your brew. So you're taking a chance, but will it work, and is it, mostly likely that it's going to work? Yeah, probably. It's probably going to work. Should you do it? I'm going to say no, and I'm going to explain why. So, I brew beer mostly, but, a beer brewing process is long, right? It takes me, 6 hours, give or take, to brew a batch of 5 gallons of beer. That's a lot of time, a lot of effort, money, product, to put into a product and put into something I'm making, to stick a balloon on it and take a chance, or increase the chances that it's going to be infected or have, a wild yeast introduced, basically cause it to fail and turn out to be something I don't want to drink. If I'm going to spend this much time and effort in making my beer, I want to make sure that I'm doing what I can to mitigate failures. So while you can go to the store and buy a bottle of juice, pour some out, stick some sugar in it. By the way, you can look this up. There's, of course you have to, know the ratios. You want a certain amount of sugar, but basically there's not enough sugar in juice just to, you could, but you're not going to get a very high alcohol return on it. Usually when you're doing, if you ever look up these videos where you do grape wine from grape juice at the store, you add more sugar because there's not enough sugar in there to feed the yeast. That's digressing though. The point is, yeah, you could stick a balloon on it. what's happening, right? The yeast eats the sugar, and then the yeast expel different things. One of the things they expel is alcohol or ethanol, and then one of the other things that they will expel is CO2, carbon dioxide. So if you put a balloon on the top and you don't poke a hole, that balloon's going to get bigger and bigger as it fills with CO2, and eventually it's probably just going to pop off because it's, there's nothing really holding it on there, and the pressure just keeps growing. Not guaranteed. It could just it could reach a point where it reaches its apex and then comes back. But if you poke a little hole in it, I guess the idea is that hopefully it's too small for a bug to get in, but small enough to let some of that gas out. I don't recommend it. For one reason is an airlock is like, I don't know, $2 to $4. I mean, I'll link one in the description. They're cheap. They're cheap. And they're reusable, right? So they're better for the environment. You can reuse them. And they're super, super, accurate. Like, it's unlikely you're going to have a problem with an infection as long as you use sanitizer. And you're not going to have bugs, right? When I say bugs, I mean like bugs. I mean like flies, spiders, gnats. I mean, they're all those kinds of things. Insects are actually attracted to carbon dioxide. So when your brew is puffing out carbon dioxide, all the little bugs that you don't see in your house or wherever you keep this are smelling that or whatever. They're sensing it, and it's just like, oh, there's something there. There's something there. And so don't be surprised if you have an airlock and a few days later you go and look and there's some things floating in it. It's okay. That is the reason for having an airlock, right? If there's stuff floating in it, it means it's doing its job. Although you might want to change it to put a new airlock or clean it out. I do, just for the gross factor. But let's talk about airlocks because, I understand there are some places in the world that maybe you can't get them, so I'll give you an alternative. But let's start with airlocks. There's really two kinds, right? There's the S variety because, it's kind of an S shape. And then there's this variety, and I don't know if it has a particular name. They work the same principle, just differently. So you might be able to see, I don't know if I can hold this up, there is two lines on this airlock. And there's a max level, right? So you're going to fill this up with a liquid. I use sanitizer, so if you're using Star San or something like that, fill it up to that line, with Star San. And then, there's a lid on this. So you just fill it from the top till you hit that line. Put your top on. The top is just another place where it will stop. It's got little holes in it, so it'll let gas out, but it's just another, larger bugs won't be able to get in there, so it keeps that out. So, of course, you have a stopper, a bung that's in your fermenter, and then you're going to put the airlock, right in there. And then as gas is trying to get out, it comes up through the chamber, around, hits your sanitizer water, pushes, enough pressure builds up, enough CO2 builds up, boop, it'll bubble and come through the water and up and out into your atmosphere. And that's when you start seeing bubbles. It'll start bubbling, right? Occasionally when you put these on, it'll go from being a straight line across to all of a sudden being way up on one side. It's just the pressure difference, right? Because there's different pressure inside your fermenter than there is outside. It's okay. You don't have to worry about it. Leave it alone. It'll be fine. As long as it's, there's that barrier in there, it keeps bugs from being able to get into your brew. Easy. One problem with this style is they're hard to clean. So I would usually fill them up with sanitizer, clean sanitizer, and you could try using a cleanser like a dye-free, color-free, oxygenated, OxiClean. But these are hard to clean. You really can't get a brush inside these chambers. You just can't. So that's the downside. These can be harder to clean, whereas these are a little different. They work the same way, but basically, I'm going to take it apart here. There's only 3 pieces. So it's just a tube, right? I don't know if you can see. There's just a tube that goes through the middle of it. And then there's this plastic, cup that goes around the tube. So you fill it up with water. How far? Well, there's this piece that also has holes in the bottom of it. So when I put that in there, you fill it up so it just covers those holes that are in that. And then what happens is this middle piece, because it's loose, as gas comes up, it's pushing up against this middle piece, and this middle piece here is going to slowly raise, and when it gets above the water level, boop, it's going to go boop, and then it's going to fall back down. So that part in the middle is going to kind of go up and down as gas is releasing. And if enough is releasing when you have this lid on it, which also has little holes in it, you might hear it, doing a little bit of a dance in there, but not nearly as much as the bubble maker, this other one. So this one is great because you can take it apart and use a brush, and it's super easy to clean. I will say that this is the style that's been used for many, many years, and it has a really satisfying bubbling noise that it makes when you've got your fermentation going. So I usually use this kind. Even though it's harder to clean, it's just more enjoyable to hear the bubbling. This one does work just fine. It's easier to clean. You can use either kind. It doesn't matter. So, third option, like what if you're somewhere where you can't buy one of these? You can't order it online for some reason. There's another option, and you may need this other option anyway. Beer tends to be very explosive when it's fermenting. And depending on what kind of fermenter you have, you may have your wort up to such a high level that when it starts fermenting, it's going to shoot out the top and bubble out the top and fill up your airlock and go all over the place. It's blowout, basically. So you have 2 options to avoid that I can think of that I use. The one that I employ is that I use a fermenter that has a lot of headroom. It has about 2 gallons of headspace in it, and I've never had any problem with blowouts because there's plenty of room in it to do whatever it wants. And I've said this before in other videos. It's okay because it's formed a layer of CO2 above that beer that's fermenting, so oxygen is not going to be an issue getting into your beer. So the other option here is called a blow-off tube. And you can use a blow-off tube if you're, experiencing this issue with your high fermentation going crazy, or just because you don't have access to, a regular airlock. So you fill sanitizer into a container. Say, I use this exact container for mine. And you don't fill all the way up. Fill it like a little over halfway maybe, because what you're going to do is you've got your fermenter with the bung. You have 2 options. You can take a hose and stick it right in. I'm not going to do it because it's sort of a pain, but you can stick it right in the hole in the top in your fermenter, and the other end of this tube goes in here, and you might want to tape it to the side or clip it to the side so it doesn't fall out. And now you've got this going on. And as gas comes out, it's going through this container here, and it's coming out the bottom, but it's underwater, under sanitizer water. And then it bubbles up and out. So any bugs trying to get in, they're not going to be able to swim through that water. And they're just going to die in that sanitizer water. They're never going to make it into your beer that's fermenting. So that's a blow-off tube, and it works exactly the same principle as an airlock. It's just not as, simple because you got to use the tubing and everything. Now, another benefit maybe you could say to this style of airlock is if you take the top off of it and you take out the centerpiece, you've got that middle, hole. If this is already in your bung and it's sitting in your fermenter, like so, you can just put the tube there. put it in there, and you don't even have to take the airlock out. It's up to you, whatever's going to work well for you. But that is the other option. So, the moral of the story is don't let people tell you that you have to use an airlock. There are breweries that don't even cover their fermenting beer. They leave it completely uncovered. One of my favorite beers, Samuel Smith, I believe they do that. I think that they use stoneware fermenters that are uncovered. I'm not saying that you should do that. I think that that's risky for a home brewer. I think the chances of getting some kind of bug in your, literal bug in your beer, or just having, an infection or something, is really going to be significantly higher if you do that. So for home brewing, I think you should stick to using an airlock or a blow-off tube. Don't use a balloon. These things are reusable. They're a few bucks. It just makes sense. And you can be a naysayer and say those people that are using balloons, it's just fine, or not using one at all. Sure, it'll work, and at some point you're going to get an infection, or some nasty fly is going to fly into your beer. So rather than ruin a lot of work and time and effort, I just prefer to use an airlock. It's a safer way to go, and it sure doesn't cost very much. So that's my take. I hope that helps a little bit on how to use an airlock, how to use a blow-off tube, and whether or not an airlock is really necessary, and can you use other things besides airlocks if you have to. Try not to. So that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by and watching. If you got something out of this video, if you found it enjoyable, if it was interesting, look up, look down. Somewhere there's going to be a link to another video that I've created. And of course, it's always super helpful. It makes me super happy if you hit subscribe. And if you hit the like button, it really helps my channel out. So thanks for stopping by. You made it to the end. I appreciate it. Happy brewing.